Hey guys, week 2 of these lives. I hope you enjoyed last week's first one, which was obviously all about sleep, and today is more about sleep. I'm going to be going into the reason why I talked about sleep being the foundation rather than a pillar of health, and why it's so powerful. I'm going to talk about blue light, which is pretty ubiquitous to our lives now, modern lives, with devices and LED light bulbs, TVs and computer screens. And then finally, we're going to be talking about your daily rhythm, the circadian rhythm, circadian, which is around the day, and how powerful it is and how we can leverage our circadian rhythm for good energy, for better energy. So let's kick off into it. If you're listening, and I hope you are, but obviously you may be busy at this time of day, just drop me a message down the bottom to say hi. If you're watching on the replay, just type in replay in the comments underneath, and we can keep chatting once this live has been posted and talk further on that sleep subject. So talking about sleep being the tide that raises all health boats last time. And the reason for that is because it affects so many of those other elements that we see as being important for our health, like eating well, like moving, exercising, and keeping our bodies healthy. And so how does that work? What's the story there? Well, I think if we start with nutrition, it's interesting to note that, when we are underslept, so typically that's around 7 or less hours, typically under 7 hours, it changes our hunger hormones and it changes our satiety hormones. It's a difficult one to get out, that is. I was going to say satiated. So yeah, satiated is the feeling we get when we're full, when our stomachs feel like they've had enough. And there's a hormone called leptin, which tells us that. Now, those of you who are fast eaters like myself will probably know that it's easy to overeat before you get that feeling, because there's a bit of a delayed reaction between the full belly and the brain realizing before that hormone kicks in. And leptin is something that we can become resistant to as well. So in the same way, poor blood sugar control means that we are losing our insulin resistance, we can also lose our leptin resistance. So resistance is that ability to use, sensitivity is the ability to use it. Resistance means that our bodies are resisting the effects of that hormone. So leptin tells us when we're full, and ghrelin tells us when we're hungry. And it's really important to use these hormones that are naturally circulating around our body at various different times of day, because they're there to tell us something important. They're there to tell us to eat or to stop eating. If we don't let them do their job, if we graze, if we just keep eating, we're not allowing those hormones to settle into a bit of a rhythm. And in the same way, we'll talk about circadian rhythm later, these hormones have a bit of a rhythm too. So some people don't feel hungry in the mornings, and those are those people that skip breakfast, and that's absolutely fine. It isn't necessarily the most important meal of the day, depending on your body type. And in future lives, we're going to get into body types and different eating patterns for different people, because there are some very different patterns depending on your body type. And that's something that you can learn more about with epigenetics. And if you go to my blog on my website, I can link that in down below. There's some really interesting reading there on the different characters who form the circle of the epigenetic profiles. There are 6 main components to that, or people, or biotypes. Anyway, so back to ghrelin and leptin. So if we're underslept, those go out of whack. In other words, they don't follow the normal healthy pattern. So if we're tired when we wake up, or if we wake up and we're tired because we're underslept, what happens is those hormones basically ask for more energy, or they rebalance themselves. Our brain says, I'm underslept, I need more energy, bring me more fuel. And generally that fuel is the simple stuff, the stuff that boosts our blood sugar levels quickly, so simple carbs, and helps us feel more alive and more energetic quickly. That's basically what our brain is asking for. And so we usually grab the wrong stuff. And often that is the stuff that our brains don't, or our stomachs, or our systems don't go, oh, you're full now, you better stop. because it's usually a bit more man-made, it's a bit more highly processed, and those are things that our brains and our bodies don't necessarily identify as food, so therefore don't realize that how many calories are going in and that it's time to stop. So, poorly slept people will generally eat more, and studies have shown that it's around 300 calories more a day. An interesting study that was done, I think it was University of Chicago, they had two groups of people, one group that was underslept, so less than 7 hours, and another group that was well slept, up to about 8.5 hours, I think it was. Put them in a room, they had the same amount of exercise, whatever it was. I can't remember the exercise information, but everything was equal in terms of what those groups did. The only difference between them was the amount of sleep. They had a buffet of healthy food options in front of them during this study. There was also a separate buffet of snack foods, which were high in sugar, high in salt, the sorts of things that you would imagine would be junk food. So they had the opportunity to eat good stuff, and all of the groups, or both groups, ate the good stuff. Interestingly, the group that were underslept went back to the buffet for the junk food. And so what happened was that over the course of the study, each day, they were eating about 300 to 330 calories more a day. And so what the findings of hey Karina, how you doing? Give you a little wave. What the findings was that, when people are underslept, those hormones go out of balance, and therefore they're driving that hunger in those people that had less than 7 hours sleep. So that's something to bear in mind in terms of the relationship between sleep and hunger. The other element is that we're less likely to go and do our movement, our exercise, and the things that we know are important for our health when we're underslept. So when we wake up and we're lacking in energy, the last thing we really want to do is go out for a run or hit the gym and do something energetic, which is important for our health. And so it means that it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. So the tiredness means lack of exercise and health. That lack of health and exercise probably means we're not going to sleep as well. So when we're exercised, we're probably going to sleep better because I will have that physical tiredness, which means that we can have a better night's sleep, a deeper night's sleep, a more restorative night's sleep. And so until we break that cycle and get back into a healthy routine of sleeping well and exercising, it will probably mean that we're not sleeping well and not exercising, not sleeping well, not exercising. So when you understand that and you understand the impact on nutrition, you can then see how powerful, it's always a two-way, so it works both ways. So the sleep helps the food and the exercise and the food helps the sleep. So it's a bi-directional relationship. So one helps the other and the other helps one. So you can see why sleep is more of a foundation rather than a pillar, because it impacts both of those elements. So I guess that's the first thing I wanted to cover off was, just how important sleep is and how it impacts those other two elements, which we've always traditionally seen as being important for our health. And yet, until we get the sleep right, those other things are impacted massively. I guess one other element which is worth sharing is when we are being judicious with our diet. In other words, we're eating the foods we should be eating. We're sticking to what we can in terms of eating whole, natural and unprocessed foods. If we're underslept, so if we've had less sleep than 7 hours over a number of days, what happens in terms of weight loss? So if we're eating the right things, we've probably got a negative energy balance. That means we're eating less than we're expending, which puts our body into that catabolic state of being able to lose weight. If we're underslept, the weight that we lose, 70% of it will come from lean muscle mass. So our brains say, I'm underslept, I'm in a situation of starvation or panic, and therefore I'm going to break down the muscle tissue before I break down the fat tissue. So not only are you losing weight, you're also losing really important muscle mass, which is the determinant of your metabolic rate, so the number of calories you burn at rest. So until the sleep gets back up to a decent level, which is, between 7 and 9, everybody's different, your body will sacrifice muscle over fat. So you will lose the wrong type of weight if that is your goal, and you really, really don't want to be losing muscle. You want to be losing stored fat because it's just fuel. So that's another element of how our bodies and our brains are very, very clever at sacrificing what it needs to survive. It's a survival instinct or a survival mechanism in our bodies. So again, it's another example of how powerful that sleep element is in terms of what's going on in our bodies when we're trying to be healthy, when we're trying to lose fat and gain muscle. Our bodies are not going to let us if we are underslept. So I always say to people, if you want to lose weight, we're not going to look at your calories, we're not going to look at your diet, we're not going to look at your exercise, we're actually going to look at your sleep. And until that's right, there's no point in trying to sacrifice calories until that's in the right place. So, moving on. Blue light. I said we'd talk about blue light and the elements of blue light that affect our circadian rhythm and why it's so important to be aware of the impact of blue light and find ways in which you can mitigate the impact so that you can set yourself up for a good night's sleep. Now, all light comes on a spectrum. So it starts at the sort of the ultraviolets, the purpley stuff, goes all the way through to yellows and reds. So red would be a naked flame, and the ultraviolet, the purpley, before we even get into blues and greens, would be the other end of the scale. Again, we don't see the color, but that is the color that that's being absorbed into our eyes and through into our brains. Now, blue light actually can damage our retinas if we look at it for too long. That's like looking at the sun. It's not very pleasant looking at the sun for very long. We get lots of blue light from the sun, and that's a good thing as long as we're not looking at it directly, because it helps us identify that it's the beginning of the day. We get outside, we look at some natural light, or we absorb some natural light into our bodies, obviously onto our skin for vitamin D creation, but also signaling our brain that it's the beginning of the day, reinforcing that circadian rhythm. So blue light never existed before the light bulb was invented in terms of artificial blue light. It always existed from the sun. But of course, what we've done is we've invented the light bulb, we've invented LED lights. We've now brought that blue light inside buildings, which were never there before. In our caves, when we were cavemen, we'd just sit around the campfire for light, heat, and warmth. And that was a red light. So we were able to sit by the campfire every night, finish our meals, tell stories, and go straight to sleep because our melatonin was able to build up and we had a good night's sleep. But that's not necessarily the case anymore because we don't sit around the campfire. Yeah, we may have a fire on in the house, but we also have lights on. We have blue light coming from televisions, TVs, screens like this. So we've got blue light coming from these screens telling us it's daytime. We've got blue light coming from computers if we're still working. And so we're confusing our brain, we're confusing our circadian rhythm. And what that means is that we're not going to build the melatonin, that sleep hormone that I talked about last week that works opposite to cortisol. If cortisol's up, melatonin's down. If melatonin's up, cortisol should be down. We're not going to be able to build that melatonin up if we're exposed to that blue light once the sun's gone down, once we're indoors and we've drawn the curtains and we leave the lights on high. So dim the lights. If you've got dimmers, that's great. Or turn some lights off so you don't stumble and trip over. Keep some on. But if you can find ways in which you can filter that blue light, that's going to be the most powerful thing. Now, I haven't got mine with me now, but I wear a pair of blue light blocking glasses. I can drop a link to that down here as well. And those actually block out the critical elements of the blue light. All light on that spectrum that I talked about before is given a number, is assigned a number. And so when these glasses are manufactured, they are tested to see what numbers are blocked, what range of light on the spectrum is blocked. And you can therefore identify whether you're blocking the right range of light out. Not all glasses are made equal. In other words, they haven't necessarily been tested. They may be cheap as chips online, but if they haven't been tested and assessed for the range of light that they're blocking, you don't know whether you're actually blocking blue light out or not. You may be wearing these orange tinted specs for no good reason. So be aware that they're not all made, all glasses are not made equally and aren't all tested as well. But it's a great way of filtering the blue light because you pop them on. It doesn't matter if you're looking at the TV, your phone, your computer, whatever it may be, blue light coming from your LED light bulbs, all of that is being filtered. So it's helping your brain realize that it's nighttime. Dimming is good as well because that brings the brightness down. And that's helping your brain signal that, oh, it's nighttime, let's start making melatonin so we can have a good night's sleep. So hopefully that explains the blue light concept and how it affects melatonin production. And the last one was timing. So I touched on that before about circadian rhythm, and there are some big elements in our lives that impact our circadian rhythm. So one is light, obviously, because the sun determines night and day. The second one is exercise, and the third one is food. And each of those elements in our lives have a bit of a rhythm. You know, we eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner typically. And then we exercise morning, evening, whatever it may be, whatever works for you. And again, going back to those body types, some bodies are better at exercising in the morning, some bodies are better at exercising in the afternoon, depending on your hormonal balance. And everybody's bodies are different, and that's why having an individualized profile on the epigenetic platform is a great way of being able to identify what your pattern is. So my point being that we're talking about sleep still, and we're talking about circadian rhythm, and putting those two together in terms of reinforcing a rhythm is about waking and sleeping at about the same time every day. And the advice is at least within half an hour's difference every day. So if your typical bedtime was 10, don't go to bed any later than 10:30 or earlier than 9:30. And if you normally wake up at 6, don't wake up much earlier than 5:30 or later than 6:30 to stay within that window and that rhythm. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is that your hormones that drive your sleep and your wake cycles, which those two I mentioned earlier, the cortisol and the melatonin, they have a pattern. They have a natural pattern, and as we habitually wake and sleep at certain times, that will groove them into a set pattern, and we can change that. For example, people who are shift workers would force those hormones into a different pattern if they were awake at nighttime and asleep during the day. Eventually, they would start to change them around, and obviously, blocking out light during the day is challenging, but it is doable. And so what we need to do is work out what our rhythm is best for our working day, or whatever it is that we do during the day, and pick a nighttime or a bedtime, a sleep time, and a wake-up time that helps reinforce that rhythm. So we talked about light reinforcing it. It's also important to have a bedtime and a wake-up time. The most important of those two I would pick is the wake-up time. If you had to reinforce one more than the other, wake-up time. You could probably let your bedtime fluctuate a little bit more than your wake-up time, but keeping that wake-up time nice and solid is almost as powerful as not having an alarm clock. So the number of times that you've woken up and your alarm clock was going to go off at 6:30 and you've woken up at 6:28 or 6:29 is your circadian rhythm doing its job for you. You don't need an alarm clock. So if you're relying to get on a meeting, it may pay to still have the alarm clock running. But if you can afford the luxury of not having to get to a meeting and therefore you're relying on your natural rhythm to wake you up, it's a far nicer start to the day because you're not getting shocked by that alarm clock waking you out of your slumber. So have a go with that. I've had clients who have done that and have actually removed their alarm clocks by their beds, and that's actually helped them A, get a better night's sleep, and B, reinforce the rhythm because they're just relying on their natural rhythm of going to sleep at the same time and waking up at the same time. So it's amazing how powerful that is, and obviously our bodies and our brains get used to that rhythm, and the more accurate it is, the better it is for our health because we're not starting the day with a stress and a rush. We're starting the day in a more relaxed state. And hi Isabel, give you a little wave. And so that means that we're going to have a better day if we have a better start to the day. So hopefully that all makes sense. And I think that's probably enough today. There's quite a bit there. And obviously watch this back on the replay and drop any comments down in the comments below here if you have any questions. I'll try and remember those two links that I said I would drop into the comments below. I know one is the blue light blocking and I can't remember what the other one is, so I'll watch back and remind myself. Hopefully that's been useful to you. Hopefully that's been another couple of useful points in terms of how important sleep is, in terms of nutrition, in terms of movement, in terms of blue light and getting to sleep, and in terms of consistency of wake up and sleep times. So From there, I will probably squeeze one more sleep session in, and then we're going to get onto menopause because I've had a request from Renee to talk about menopause. I am not the expert on menopause. I do, however, have a certain number of skills and knowledge on the subject, and I have been skilling myself up on menopause. So I guess there are some elements that I can talk to that are useful to share in terms of biochemistry. And how that can be used to help from a menopause point of view. So look forward to catching you next week, and bye for now. Cheers.